Next, the commander of the Russian forces in Ukraine has announced the withdrawal of his troops from much of the occupied city of Kherson. Now, Kherson has been the biggest prize in Russia's invasion, but Ukrainian forces have mounted a concerted counter-offensive to try to recapture the city. Well, joining me now is our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. Hi, Frank. So just talk us through what is it we've heard from the Russian military?
This is very significant. There is no possible way that Russia can disguise this as anything other than a retreat. So it's been announced jointly by Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and also the General Surovikin, who is in overall command of Russia's operations in Ukraine, that for logistical reasons, they are withdrawing, as he puts it, others would call it a retreat, from Kherson city, which is on the western bank of the River Dnipro. So the River Dnipro runs north to south, right down the middle of Ukraine, all the way from the Chernobyl, Pripyat marshes and Kyiv up in the north, all the way down to the Black Sea. It's the only significant city that Russia has managed to capture in this 9-month war so far. And it's also the provincial capital of one of the so-called oblasts, one of the provinces that President Putin declared were now part of Russia. So it completely puts the lie to the fact that it's now part of Russia if the major city in that province is no longer under Russian control. I think we should be a little bit wary here because there is always the possibility that this is some kind of trap. Now, the announcement from the Russian commanders is that they are logistically unable to keep that city supplied. Ukrainian forces have been advancing slowly down the coast towards it, taking village after village, slowly encircling it. And Russia has been withdrawing its forces to the eastern bank, where they're building a defensive line. But they will have left behind them a lot of landmines, booby traps. They will be making that city quite hard to inhabit or even to take. And there's always the possibility that they've left behind units who will be trying to ambush the advancing Ukrainian forces. So, yes, on paper, this is, as one pro-Kremlin Russian blogger put it, a black day in the history of the Russian army. But be wary, because if this is a bigger defeat as it looks, then Russia is likely to retaliate, almost certainly by hitting Ukrainian cities and punishing the civilian population.
Interesting, of course, we've seen recently those strikes on crucial Ukrainian infrastructure. Just bring us up to speed, Frank, if you could, with how the Ukrainian advance or counter-offensive or military performance is happening across the rest of the country. We've got a good idea of that, what's happening, you've outlined there in Kherson. What about the rest of Ukraine?
Well, most of the fighting is taking place in the eastern area of Ukraine, known as the Donbass. This is in 2 provinces, Donetsk and Luhansk. And it's a pretty slow, grinding battle there, or battleground, where neither side is making huge, big progress. There was a lot of optimism on the Ukrainian side in late September and October that they were going to be able to push on, having taken a lot of ground around Kharkiv. But that seems to have largely ground to a halt. The Russians are reinforcing their troops there with a lot of conscripts, a lot of reservists, but also the Wagner Group, who are they're mercenaries. They are not an official part of the Russian army, but they're all ex-Russian forces, many of them from Spetsnaz, Russian special forces. They've got a reputation for ruthlessness and brutality, but also quite a lot of military professionalism. Russia has not fought a good war. They don't seem to be capable of conducting what is known as all-arms warfare, where you combine things like artillery, infantry, aerial surveillance, drones, cyber, putting it all together in a carefully coordinated effort. They're not very good at that. The Ukrainians are quite good at it. They've got much smaller resources, but with a lot of help and instruction and training and support from NATO, they have fought a much better war than Russia has. So we've got winter coming. That means a lot of rain and eventually snow. I don't expect to see a lot of ground changing hands in eastern Ukraine during that time. But what's gone on in Kherson, just to bring it back to that, in the south, is a pretty bitter blow. At one point, Russia thought they were going to be able to use Kherson as a springboard to move westwards and take the city of Odessa, Ukraine's main remaining port there, and that would have cut Ukraine off from the sea. They're not going to be able to do that now.
Interesting stuff, Frank. Thanks so much for that. That's Frank Gardner, our security correspondent there.